All right. Well, welcome to our hi Jan. Welcome to our webinar, and I'm going to introduce our guest speaker, Eric Rasmussen, in a moment. But let me cover just the normal housekeeping things first, just in case you didn't notice it's being recorded. So if you don't like that, now's the time to excuse yourself. Stephanie is not with us today, so I'll be administering the Zoom. So there may be moments where we need to be patient. So as you know, we usually mute you until the question and answer and discussion part starts. And then in the meantime, you can put your comments in the chat box, but you'll be able to talk when we get to that point. And, again, we love it if we can see you. So please feel free to turn on your camera unless, you got something busy going on in the background, or you just would prefer not to. So before I introduce Eric, I want to give you a preview of our upcoming webinar. And that's in November 3rd, 2 weeks from now. Our presenter is going to be Gerard Bodell, and Gerard is the new president of CASA Minnesota, which is the court-appointed special advocates of Minnesota, which, as many of you know, is the nonprofit that recruits and trains volunteer guardians ad litem in Minnesota. And in fact, quite a few of our volunteers are guardians, volunteer guardians. And if you didn't know it, CASA is in a big state of transition because the state program has decided, at least for now, to stop recruiting and training volunteers to be guardians. So as a result, the program's winding down slowly through attrition. But Gerard is the new president. He's working with the state agency on that, and he'll give you a progress report on his negotiations with them. And in the meantime, he's forging ahead with some plans, new plans, and expansions for CASA, I think, on the assumption they're going to keep going. So please join us for that. Be an interesting discussion of the program and also the politics around it. So that's 2 weeks from now. So Eric Rasmussen is an investigative reporter at KSTP Channel 5 Eyewitness News here in the Twin Cities. And he came here from Boston, as you will see from his presentation a couple of years ago, December 2018. Eric has also been an investigative reporter not only here in Boston, but in San Francisco area and Orlando, Florida as well. Eric's won multiple regional Murrow and Emmy awards, including Outstanding Reporter in the Upper Midwest in 2019 and Outstanding Investigative Reporter in New England in 2018. And I think you'll see why when you see some of his work. Just want you to know that KSTP is currently the only media outlet that is covering child protection and foster care issues on a regular basis in Minnesota. Other agencies, other media outlets have stopped doing this. Eric's the only one who really keeps track of this stuff. So we are especially appreciative of the work that Eric and Channel 5 Eyewitness News are doing, and hope they can help us get some things back on the radar. So Eric, with that, let you run with it.
Rich, I really appreciate it. You still hear me okay? I always like to double check on these things.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Pretty basic thing I have here, but I think it might help. If everybody can still see me in the little tab. Let's see here. Bear with me one moment. And now, of course, that thing that was working before isn't working, so bear with me. Sorry, guys, I'll be quick here. There we go. All right. Does everybody see this slideshow okay? You see that okay, Rich?
Yes,
again, thank you for the introduction, the really kind words. Again, my name's Eric. I won't go into all the places I've been, but I've been a reporter now, a TV news reporter for 22 years, all over the country, 7 different TV markets. And, for more than a decade, I was what they call a general assignment reporter, which means every day I would turn a story. And that meant covering the shootings and the fires and school board meetings and everything else. And, about 10 years ago, I was lucky to be able to make the transition into doing full-time investigative reporting, where sometimes we take days, weeks, months. I even took a year to do a story that really gets after sort of the story behind the story, if you think of it that way. To put it in a nutshell, my work covers a wide variety of subjects, but so often our stories come down to that word there, to accountability. And sometimes the accountability we're seeking is from individuals. Sometimes it's from agencies or government officials. Sometimes it's accountability in the larger sense of how a system works. And Rich and I have talked about that a lot when it comes to child welfare issues. And just to focus first on the most recent matter of interest for us when it comes to child welfare was the story of this little, this 8-year-old girl named Autumn Hallow. It was August of 2020, so more than a year ago now. This all started with breaking news, and I'm talking about news that everybody had, print, TV, that a little 8-year-old girl was found dead in the apartment of her father and stepmother. And obviously everybody was covering that. It was so shocking and terrible, although unfortunately not as uncommon as we'd like it to be. So very early on, we had the story about the father and stepmother arrested and charged in her death. And you know, pretty much everybody had access to the criminal complaint that was filed. And that's where we learned the terrible details that Autumn appeared to be emaciated. She had bruises. And, you know, I'll spare you some of the other details, but truly a terrible case where this girl was in really bad shape. And it looked like some of this alleged abuse had been going on for a long time. You know, but really for our purposes, although I was involved in covering some of that, as I just alluded to, our job is to kind of get to the larger story or to find out what's really going on. And that certainly required collaboration. And when I say collaboration, how this story came to be, the story that we ended up telling was a fellow reporter of mine who was just assigned, again, general assignment, had heard from neighbors who said, man, we've heard screaming for months and months. Police are always out here. We got an email tip from somebody who said, you really need to look into this because I think, you know, there was something going on with that family. And, you know, we didn't have a good way to vet that particular person. So we started hearing a lot of this. So one of our investigative producers, Anna Lastra, and I essentially volunteered to say, we want to take this on and see where it leads. But I'll tell you, the one thing we don't do, with very, very few exceptions, is purely he said, she said stories. So the story we weren't going to do is have a family member on saying, the parents did, you know, the father did this and the other agencies did that. And then the other side saying, no, we didn't. What we really care about is what does the data show? What do the records show? So one of the first things we did was ask for all calls for service to that address where Autumn died. And sometimes we do that on stories and we get two things back and, you know, you sort of move on. But this is just a screenshot that they had to give us a spreadsheet of calls for service to that location. And as you see highlighted there, there was, you know, someone heard an adult yelling, I will hit you. So that obviously raised our interest. And we did a story at that time, very, very shortly thereafter, a short story saying, hey, we've obtained these calls for service. Here are all the things they lay out. In the course of our reporting, obviously, every time we report something, we reach out to all involved for comment. But when you've got a criminal homicide complaint, obviously you knew we were going to get limited back from the people accused of doing this. And as sort of a continuing theme, although not surprising in the work we do, we weren't able to get much of a comment back from police or Sherburne County, which was the county in this case that was handling some of these child welfare concerns. So what we initiated, what in our business we call a rolling investigation. That means we gather as much data and information as we can. We vet it the best we can with both on and off the record sources, and then put out those stories as we get them. But we sort of look at them like chapters in a book. And that's how we treated this story. We weren't going to just keep all the information and sit on it for months and months until we could release the one big story. Instead, we thought it was important to continue to get this information out there. And that's sort of what we did. And in fairly short order, in a matter of a month or so, obviously from the police reports and the public records we could view, we knew one of the key figures in this was Autumn's mother, Kelsey Cruz. And what the public records had at least alluded to was that from about February of 2020 until Autumn's death in August, Kelsey had not been allowed to see her daughter. despite a 50-50 custody agreement. And that agreement we obtained through court records. And, Kelsey didn't want to talk to us at first. And, I've been doing this too long to go knock on the doors of grieving family members. I've had to do it too often, and it is to this day my least favorite thing to do. So to give you insight there, I did some initial outreach to another family member, another person associated with Kelsey, and said, hey, when the time is right, I'd like to try to talk to her, but I didn't do, the hard sell, so to speak. And the family initially sent me a statement, which we included in one of our stories. But then one day, unsolicited, Kelsey reached out to me and said, can we sit down and talk? That's not with the cameras and the microphones and the lights. I just drove myself out to Sherburne County. We sat down and talked for the better part of an hour. And that's where she really told me all the things kind of beyond the paperwork, the things she had done, how excruciating this was to try to see her daughter and not be allowed to see her, and how she didn't have hard and fast evidence of abuse of her daughter, but she had been concerned for her son in the past, Kelsey's Autumn's slightly older brother. So through that period of time and building of trust, and genuine trust, finally, Kelsey, as you see in the screenshot, did agree to sit down with us a couple of months after her daughter's death and did her first TV interview, where, that you can read as much stuff as you want on a piece of paper, but when you see her face and you hear from her, to this day, it still really affects me. And I got pretty thick skin. So we did that interview, but then in addition to that, we had to get help from the experts, like Rich was kind enough to speak with me. And you may have, if you saw our coverage, Rich popped up a couple times on camera, but I think Rich would agree we spent significantly more time off camera of him trying to help me navigate these issues and connect me with other experts. And a lot of what you don't see in the TV stories is I talked to child welfare workers who weren't going to go on camera, but retired folks and others from other counties who I was able to backstop information off of. And, some of them even said, well, there's going to be some things that the mom wishes that child welfare could have done that they couldn't have done. But there were others who said, hey, these couple of items you're looking at, that's worth pursuing more aggressively about where maybe the system failed. So in those conversations, we were able to get sort of a clearer roadmap of how we wanted to proceed. And I don't want to go on and on about it, but eventually a year after Autumn's death, we put out this story that was titled A Pattern of Abuse. And that called back to our reporting over the last year, the public records, the calls for service, but also new information we had gathered because Kelsey, being the mother of Autumn, agreed to sign a release that allowed us to access some child welfare county records that are not truly public data, but with her sign off, we were able to get even more that told us maybe a clearer picture of what was going on. And by no means is it the end of our reporting, because that continues. There's since been a federal lawsuit that she filed that you'll see us reference in this story. But I'll stop there and go ahead and play that for you. If you give me a second as I kind of work through this here. And then I'll have a few more comments, and then Rich, I'll probably toss it back to you and we can kind of figure out the next steps of where to go from there. But go ahead and take a listen.
And now, a story you will see only on Nightcast. Tomorrow marks 1 year since an 8-year-old girl from Sherburne County was beaten, starved, and murdered by her father and stepmother. Ever since then, 5 Investigates has been digging into what happened to Autumn Hallow. Tonight, investigative reporter Eric Rasmussen is here with newly obtained documents and recordings. And Eric, you found authorities knew about allegations of abuse in that household more than a year before Autumn was killed. Kevin, the timeline we've constructed from police reports, interviews, and other evidence is now at the heart of a $30 million federal lawsuit. It names dozens of mandated reporters, including child protection workers and police officers, each accused of negligence and failing to intervene. First, though, a warning tonight that some of what you're about to see and hear is disturbing.
The bottom line is Autumn needs justice.
The final days and weeks of her life were torture. The screams of a child so loud, neighbors repeatedly called police.
I just kept thinking, that can't be right. That can't be right. That can't be right.
But long before 8-year-old Autumn Hallow died, starving and beaten in a bathroom at this apartment complex in Elk River last year, before her father and stepmother admitted to her murder, her 9-year-old brother sounded the first alarm.
Do you feel safe, Dad? What? Why do you say no?
With his mother's permission, 5 investigators obtained the audio of this interview with Sherburne County Child Protection in February of 2020, 6 months before Autumn was killed.
I have to sleep on the floor, there's no pillow in the or I get soap in my room.
The red flags also black and blue.
He had bruises from his forehead down to his feet.
Kelsey Cruz says she took her son, Autumn's older brother, to the emergency room in September 2019 after he came home from a weekend with his father and stepmother, Brett and Sarah Hallow. This medical report shows doctors made a referral to Child Protection after Cruz documented multiple bruises all over the 8-year-old's body. Was there any doubt in your mind what had happened when you took him into the hospital?
No, they were everywhere.
Less than 2 months later, an Elk River detective wrote, "I was unable to substantiate any sort of abuse allegations against Sarah or Brett."
And said that, they were all accidental or from kids at school or from the playground, and that it was closed. There's so many things that could have been done, that should have been done. There were so many opportunities.
Lawyers Carrie Locke and Rich Hector now represent Kelsey Cruz in a federal civil rights lawsuit filed against Sherburne County Child Protection and Elk River Police. Those agencies accused of putting Autumn at significant risk of serious and immediate harm by allowing Brett and Sarah Hallow to keep her for the last 6 months of her life.
Kelsey had a right to access her daughter.
As 5 investigators first reported last year, the Hallows blocked Cruz from seeing Autumn despite a 50-50 custody agreement and dozens of calls to police.
The police reports reveal that so many of the wellness checks were cleared without laying eyes on Autumn,
including at least 3 nights last year. Neighbors called police several times, concerned about screaming from the Hallows' apartment. One says she shared these recordings with police, including this one, recorded just 3 days before Autumn was killed. But police reports show those child welfare checks were repeatedly cleared with no contact because no one answered the door.
It's not often easy to actually get in the door, but most police departments, in my experience, have the ability to kind of get in the door.
Rich Gehrman is the executive director of the nonprofit Safe Passage for Children of Minnesota. We first spoke with him about Autumn Hallow's case last year.
It just struck me that everybody did what they were supposed to do, and the child still died.
But after we obtained more evidence, including those medical reports, photos, and interviews, he now questions whether police and child protection did enough.
I think you've dug out some more facts which raise more concerns that action could have been taken sooner, could have been taken more aggressively.
Autumn's death is the predictable result of failing to intervene when there are 30+ reports from so many different people.
Family members, doctors, and neighbors using the words 8-year-old Autumn did not have or was afraid to speak in this last interview with Sherburne County.
Who would you talk to if you had any worries? Anybody?
Just thinking about hearing her voice.
Autumn's mom, Kelsey, still seeking justice and changes to a system that did not protect her daughter.
That would help get justice for her too, is making it so that other kids don't have to go through the same thing, because they do every single day. This happens to kids.
Elk River and Sherburne County have both declined our repeated requests for an interview, and it could be some time before we learn the outcome of the civil lawsuit against them. That case won't come up again in federal court until October. Both sides are waiting for Brett and Sarah Hallow to be sentenced for Autumn's murder, and that hearing, Kevin, is scheduled for late next month.
Eric, any idea how the federal lawsuit might play out based on past cases?
Kevin, there is some precedent, and the experts I've spoken to in this particular area of the law tell me It's not especially favorable for Autumn's mother, despite what her lawyers call a mountain of evidence that they say police and the county failed to intervene. Past rulings have actually held that public agencies and their employees cannot be held liable, especially when they're not directly responsible for the care of the child like they would be, for example, if she were in foster care. Of course, the lawyers who filed this lawsuit insist this case is different, and Kevin, they say they're ready for it.
Eric Rasmussen reporting. We'll be right back.
Okay. I'm going to come back here if I can, which I can't, but you know what? It doesn't matter. I'm going to stop screen sharing for a moment. Rich, we still good?
Yes.
The last thing I'll just add about that, just as a point of more context, because I know that's kind of the purpose of today. You know, one of the things that really struck some people who saw that story and the feedback we got was that the neighbors' recordings of the screaming and the phone call, and you saw kind of the shaky cell phone video. You know, that was alluded to in police reports and some other documents, but you know, I worked pretty hard to reach out to that neighbor. Couldn't get through on an email or a phone call. So I just showed up at the door one day. Again, no cameras, none of the kind of sensational stuff you might see portrayed on TV, and just had a conversation with her. And she ultimately said, you know what, if Autumn's mom is okay with me sharing this stuff, then I'm okay with it. And then she ultimately gave that to us. But we also tried to be as sensitive as possible in how we treated all of that material, including the audio interviews with Autumn and her brother. The family didn't request that we blur him. We decided to blur him and not name him because, as we all know, things on the internet live forever, and he shouldn't have to have that to be something he has to talk about if he doesn't want to. So that was just our thinking. But I don't know, Rich, if you want me to stop there, if people want to talk specifically about that, or if you want me to just make a reference to that other report we did.
Well, it's about what, a 6-minute video?
Yeah.
You know, I think I found it very interesting as a video, and so we still have more than half an hour, so I think it's worth the 6 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, if you guys just bear with me here 1 second, I will pull it up. So I'm going through YouTube here.
And you need to screen share again.
I will. I'm just
Anybody ever tracking that?
I'm getting the goods together here. Okay, I will screen share again. Thanks for your patience, everybody. And this, real quick, you still hear me, correct? Before I hit play, as Rich mentioned, before I came here to the Twin Cities, I worked in Boston, where we essentially had done a lot of child welfare stories. And I was telling Rich that in our conversations, my producer and I, with a source of ours, this is somebody who never appears on TV, but she had been helpful to us, who worked in child welfare. She said, hey, you know, I'm noticing in my office, sometimes we're closing out child welfare cases when we don't know where the kids are. Typically cases, as many of you know, get closed because the child's emancipated at 18, or the child gets adopted, hopefully. And on very limited occasions, sadly, the child dies. Those are all reasons for the case to be closed. But what they were finding, our source told us, was that some cases were being closed because the kid was just missing, which can also include runaways, which I know a lot of people in child welfare industry now are trying to get away from even using the word runaway, because there are so many different circumstances that contributes to that. So we spent a year on this investigation, and this is the final product of that.
Tonight, 25 Investigates exposes a nationwide failure in foster care. Missing and forgotten kids kicked out of the system.
Investigative reporter Eric Rasmussen first told you yesterday how some children at group homes are exploited by sex traffickers on weekends, but that's only part of the story.
For the last year, Eric and a team of journalists, they discovered states, including Massachusetts, closed the cases of missing foster kids, but they were still unaccounted for.
Mark Vanessa, 25 Investigates, teamed up with sister station WSB in Atlanta and found thousands of foster kids across the country Among the missing and forgotten, for years, Massachusetts DCF has been telling the feds it hasn't closed a single case of a foster kid who's missing, but our investigation found otherwise.
In the summer, we might go out and meet like 20, 30, 40 people in just one day.
Amid the fast pace and prosperity of downtown Boston, do you feel like the system let you down?
Yes, very much.
25 Investigates found kids once in the state's care, now on the street.
When I was 14, they just gave me up to DCF because they couldn't handle me.
We met 19-year-old Joanna on the Boston Common, a former foster kid. She says she ran away from a group home right before a suicide attempt landed her in the hospital last year. Did anybody ever track you down and say, Joanna, you gotta come back?
No, they did not care. I've never gotten an email from my counselor, my DCF worker.
Joanna says she was missing from the group home less than 2 weeks.
So it was like, look, I really need help. And when I went in, she said, your case is closed.
What was going through your mind when they said they closed your case?
I knew right then I was screwed.
DCF wouldn't comment on Joanna's case, but says it can close any child's case once they turn 18, even if they're missing. Since the year 2000, federal records show child welfare agencies across the country closed the cases of more than 53,000 foster kids listed as runaways, and at least another 61,000 missing. But over the last decade, the same federal data shows Massachusetts and a few other states reported closing 0 cases of foster kids labeled missing or runaway. Researchers, child advocates, and Joanna's own experience suggest those numbers are misleading. Does that make you mad?
It makes me really upset. And policy, what's our policy? What are they doing?
Elizabeth Jackson is the executive director of Bridge Over Troubled Waters in Boston. She says many of the homeless kids helped by her nonprofit come from foster care, and she's calling out the system.
And there are kids out here. And so if you feel like I'm pointing a finger at you, so be it. Come to the table and let's figure it out, because we are seeing kids, and I know you know that we are seeing kids.
Massachusetts DCF reports it unloads more than 800 foster children from the system every year when they turn 18. But the agency told us it does not track how many of those kids were missing at the time they were discharged. In a year-long nationwide investigation, Boston 25 News and our Atlanta sister station, WSB, contacted all 50 states. We uncovered a patchwork of policies, with some able to close a case after a foster child is missing for just a few months, while others must wait until they turn 21. Records show the state of Illinois discharged a missing foster child in 2016 who was just 9 years old. The state now tells us it took the child back into custody a year later. Jackson says no one was looking for a 15-year-old girl missing from foster care in New York when she walked into this office in Boston saying she'd been abandoned by a boyfriend. What do you really think was happening in that situation?
Oh, she was trafficked. She was being put in a prostitution ring, and she didn't even know it.
An unidentified teenage girl shot dead in Atlanta last year turned out to be a missing foster child. When the victim's brother finally saw this facial reconstruction by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, she was identified as 17-year-old Danetta Franks.
It just sucks to know that she was speaking out, crying out for help, that she never got it.
A new federal law now requires all states to report missing foster kids to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children here in the Washington, D.C. area. But even now, the center tells us that's not always happening.
There are agencies out there that have been known to close these cases, and then therefore no one's looking.
Bob Lowry is vice president of the National Center's Missing Children's Division. We can do better at this, can't we?
I think the answer to that is yes, we can do better.
Brittany Hill is part of that effort.
But yeah, I walked like 9 miles in one day.
We followed her on foot in Boston,
My name's Brittany. I'm actually an outreach worker with Bridge Over Troubled Waters.
trying to find kids at risk.
I can actually just pass a card to you. You don't have to give me any information. We can at least get you hooked up with a counselor to do an intake.
We witnessed one breakthrough on this day when a homeless teen asked for help.
It's great. That's what we want out here.
Well, there's a chance we'll have somewhere to stay tonight
Yeah.
because of you.
Yeah.
Joanna says she's been living on the street too ever since the day the state closed her case.
And I just broke down and just left. And been homeless for the last 11 months.
Now an adult, no longer missing, but still feeling forgotten.
Looking back on the situations, it really kills.
Now, in the weeks since we met Joanna, Bridge Over Troubled Waters told us it was working to help her find housing but at last check, she is still looking.
Eric, this seems to be such a big problem. What is the state doing about it?
Vanessa, I can tell you, we first contacted DCF about this in August of last year. Now, they declined our latest request for an interview to sit down and talk to the commissioner, but in a statement, DCF said it works with law enforcement and families to try to find missing kids. The agency insists it can reopen the case of any foster child even after they turned 18, but we found that just wasn't the case with Joanna.
Hopefully this brings some change. Great reporting, Eric.
So that obviously was the culmination. We you know, sometimes in our business, we chuckle a little bit when somebody says, oh, what is that? Okay, there we go. Sorry, guys. When somebody says, you know, this is a year-long investigation, but we truly, while juggling everything else, spent a year on that. And it was gratifying that the Washington Post and New York Times columnists wrote some op-eds on our findings. But just a reminder that you know, the work that Safe Passage does and others do really just needs to keep going as we again, going back to that word accountability, try to hold everything and everyone accountable.
Okay, well, great. I would just say people with questions or comments, please just jump in, right? Eric, you're ready
Absolutely.
for that? Yep.
Hi, Eric, I did want to compliment you on your procedure. That it seems to me that television reporting is, at least listening to you, much more responsible in tracking down the other people involved in the story, getting different points of view, checking all the sources. Than sometimes we get out of at least local journalism. So that part of your presentation I thought was very gratifying, and the whole presentation very interesting.
Thank you. And I mean, that means a lot. I appreciate it. As with any other line of work, whether it's journalism or nonprofit work, or frankly, even the agencies involved in protecting these kids, you know, we're not batting 1,000 as an industry by any means. We just try to do our best with each story that we take on. So thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
After the death of Eric Dean, and the governor put together the task force to look at child protection practices,
right.
My understanding was that there were new expectations for child protection no longer closing cases once a certain number of reports had come in. Did you talk to Sherburne County about that?
Well, no. I mean, the short answer is no. We haven't really talked to Sherburne County about anything, despite our best efforts. You know, I think, and I don't say that to you know, besmirch them in any way. You had an active homicide case going on that only recently was resolved with sentencing here a month or so ago. And now on top of that, you have a $30 million federal lawsuit. So anytime litigation or active criminal cases involved, they're going to just shut us down from the moment I say hello. So I mean, I think your question is totally valid. You know, I don't know. You know, there were individual reports to HHS in Sherburne County about Autumn specifically. But even as the mother, Kelsey Cruz, acknowledged both to me and in reports, when push came to shove, and they said, do you have evidence right here and now that your daughter is being abused? And Kelsey, she would probably say, even to her own detriment, said no. But it becomes a difficult scenario there where I don't have evidence because I can't see my daughter and I haven't seen her in 6 months. But to your larger question about changing some of the ground rules for how they handle these cases, that I think that's kind of one of the next avenues in which our reporting will go.
And then just to follow up, because there was family court involvement as well with a custody battle, so to speak, do you know if the children ever had a guardian ad litem appointed in that family court case?
And that's a question I had as well. I think I read through every court record we could get our hands on, and I never saw a GAL listed for either Autumn or her brother. It's possible I could have missed that because her brother had a little bit more of a child protection history, but I never saw mention of a guardian ad litem.
And I would add, as some of you know, I was on that governor's task force, Judy, and I don't believe, I've recently gone through them, I don't believe there was an explicit recommendation out of the 93 recommendations. There wasn't one that said that you shouldn't, that you should screen in cases once they're reported multiple times. But one thing that happened is that there was a court case that recently got settled in late 2019 in Hennepin County, where that was one of the things that the federal courts imposed on Hennepin, which is to say, unless there's extenuating circumstances, you can only kind of get one time that you assign a case to family assessment, and after that, you have to go to investigation. Only one time you can screen out a report. But that's not the practice, as I understand it, throughout the state. And one of the other main recommendations that we spent a lot of time on the task force was that the state should prepare a kind of a county by county report on how many children had been reported, like one time, two times, three times, X times. I've seen over 25 times kids getting reported. So you can see when counties are routinely screening out case after, report after report. And the state has minimally complied with that requirement, and they say they don't have the technical ability to do that, but actually they do now because they've been tracking screened out reports since the task force. So it's the kind of thing that we're constantly following up on and trying to get them to do, to implement the recommendations that came out of that task force, and many of them have not been done.
I would add to that, Rich, that based on what you said there's another more recent case we were looking into where we asked for those totals from another county, and they did ultimately provide them. But as is so often the case in the work that we do on this side is we often need a family member or a person to step forward and speak about it. And while that might seem trivial to getting out the larger story, sometimes that's what we need for us to put it in a spotlight where people will pay attention to it.
And I would just add to Rich that one of the changes from the task force was that the rule at that time had been that you couldn't look at previous reports and previous calls. So like Eric Dean having had many calls, they couldn't refer to that. So they could refer to that now. And we did ask for the transparency, like Rich said, of how many calls. And in their annual report now, it's very limited in what they're saying. I mean, they looked at in 1 year, how many kids had this many reports in the state that were screened in, but it didn't look back over years. Like I had a kid had 20 reports over 3 years, that's not included at all. So I agree with Rich that there needs to be more transparency in that process. And I just generally thank you for your all your work in doing this and bringing it to attention, because I think when you do it, things change. As we saw with Brandon, I mean, that started a whole change, and with you doing this, it brings change. And please keep working on it, and please keep covering these stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, and we should say Dr. Hollensteiner was also a member of that governor's task force in 2015. So other comments or questions? Because I have a couple I can toss out if you, but let me give you all a chance first. So Eric, how do you? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I'm Lois, Rich's wife, and I just wanted to say thank you again for the work that you're doing. I just want to let you know that in 1968, when I was a beginning social worker in Boston, I happened to get involved in doing a little street work with runaways and met the sister Barbara and Barbara who started the bridge over troubled waters. And it made me very sad in a sense. I mean, wonderful that they're still going and that they're still doing the same work that these two sisters were doing. But very sad that it doesn't seem like things have changed, that there's still so many kids that are just left to be on their own without the resources or the care in terms of their life growing up that enables them to really survive and be healthy adults. So again, I thank you again for all you're trying to do.
No, thank you. And that perspective is really interesting. I will tell you, just as we did that story from 2017 to 2018. And as part of it, you only saw a tiny bit of it, but the executive director took us through a tour of Bridge Over Troubled Waters, which is now, I don't know, 7 floors. It's incredible what they've expanded to, where they have multiple living rooms. Then they have kitchens where kids learn basic cooking skills. They have an entire floor that is a dentist's office with licensed dentists to do dental work for these kids. I mean, it has expanded into just this massive operation. It's really impressive what they do.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear.
Well, when that started, it started in the basement of the child welfare agency that Lois worked in. And it was basement they lost 1/3 of their social workers because they started working with these kids, and they put signs on the bathrooms that said, "Don't use the toilets, the hippies are using them," this stuff like that, So these kids were pariah, and Lois's agencies, reached out and started working with them. And I was working with them on the other end of town, which is how the two of us met. But that's wonderful to hear that they've grown so greatly.
Yeah.
Eric, I was going to ask you, how do you all decide to do a story? Do you have to go in and pitch it to your producer, or does your producer bring it to you, or some combination? Do you have to persuade them, do a PowerPoint? How does it work?
It varies from story to story. So it is certainly a combination of those things. I think the investigative work we do is so varied that some of these stories jump off the page and hit you over the head. And that's where Autumn's story kind of gets classified, where you have the story that just the death in and of itself is shocking and is newsworthy. But then after we made that initial request for calls for services, there was no more pitching that we had to do at that point. I'm very thankful here at KSTP that we have, management and station ownership, frankly, that's committed to doing this type of work. And they give us a lot of autonomy to make these decisions, which hopefully most of the time is a good thing. And so we in very short order, took this from sort of an initial tickle or an inquiry to see what's there, to saying, all right, we're now committed to covering this as far as it takes us. There are certainly other stories where they may not even be child welfare related. I'm talking about just generally where I will go to my bosses and say, hey, I want to look at this, or I've made some initial requests for data and I have just enough that tells me maybe we need to pursue this. I will also say that, and I don't want to say this happens frequently, but on occasion there are stories we walk away from that on their face we see something that says this deserves a serious investigation. Maybe we have a tip or a record. And I could tell you without naming the story because we didn't report it, but we got about a couple days into a story and a couple of long drives. And then we had a nice long talk on our investigative team. And we said, you know what, this one does feel too much like a he said, she said, and there's not enough meat there. And so we paused. And, if it pops back up again, we'll jump on it. But these things kind of come in fits and starts sometimes.
So how many people on your, you said an investigative team, are there more Erics out there that we don't know about yet?
My wife would laugh at me with my my self-worth. I would say there's only one me. No, but we have a great team. We have 3 investigative reporters. So I'm one of 3 full-time investigative reporters, meaning, we're not on TV every day. We work on these things and then we jump in as needed. We've got 2 photographers who are dedicated to doing this work with us. I say photographer, TV cameramen who shoot the stories, edit them. And we have an executive producer who is kind of our leader of the crew. And he doesn't just sit back, he gets into the records there with us and crunches the numbers and goes over documents and hounds public officials to get answers. And I think what's special about our team, not to say we're the only one doing it this way, is that I sort of view everybody, myself, the photographer, or whomever else, as a producer, meaning that everybody has some input. Lee, the photographer who worked on the majority of the Autumn stories with me, it would not be uncommon for him when he's editing the story, putting the video together, or even out on a shoot with me to say, hey, we need to ask about this, or hey, this doesn't sound right to me. Can you go back and check that? And that's where I think the value in that collaboration comes together. But not a big team at all. We just, make it work with what we got.
Well, feel free to jump in, anyone, or I will, because I have some editorial comments before we go. I think what I've just noticed, I took a look at the last 5 decades of child welfare for an article I'm writing, and what really jumped out is that, people will say, well, how can something like this happen, and it's correct. It's happening all the time. Since Brandon Stahl finished his tracking of child fatalities in 2015, we picked up and have been tracking them as well. I'm not sure I've even got everyone, but there's been 47 since that time. So it's almost exactly the same rate as before the big, investigative reporting thing that Brandon Stahl did in 2015. About 1 every 6 or 7 weeks is what it boils down to. And what the reason for that, when I look at the last half a century of child welfare, is every single decade there's been a new initiative around family preservation or family reunification. And the pendulum has swung to the point where all around the country, child welfare agencies are pretty much doing everything they can not to remove a child and everything they can to reunite the child with the family, often when the family has not changed at all and they're not ready. So we're literally leaving children to their own fate because child welfare has become so parent focused and so family preservation focused. And a lot of that is around the issues of racial disparities because of the disparate number of African American and indigenous families particularly who have had their children removed. But, our view is that you have to kind of look at it from the child's point of view and say, is this a safe place? And is the family willing to do the work necessary to make it a safe place? But we've really, I think we can prove, and if I get this article out, you could read my logic on it, that we can really prove that we really aren't listening to kids, and we almost don't care what's going on with them as long as we can find a reason not to screen in the case. And beyond that, when I've looked at the last several years, and I really have to check this, but I think I've noticed that there's an increase in torture, what the kind of torture that Autumn went through. There's been several cases just in the last year where it's gone on for a long period of time. A lot of people knew about it, but they eventually tortured the children to death. And the other trend I've noticed is that 10 out of those 47 cases were either foster care or kinship foster care. So we're not doing a very good job of vetting the placements that we remove kids to. So it's just completely gotten out of balance, and there's not really much political will to restore that balance somewhat in the favor of the child because of all of the political pressures and the pressures particularly to keep children in their home generally and in minority communities in particular. So we have our work cut out for us.
Yeah, Rich, and I remember when you talked to me about some of that, it really struck me just how often this is happening. The other thing I thought of that I would throw out there is, as you might imagine, or maybe you wouldn't imagine, every time we air one of these stories, I am inundated with emails and calls from people who say this is happening right now to my son or daughter or a family member's son or daughter, and you've got to get involved. And I take every one of those seriously, but so often the challenge we have is prior to something truly tragic happening, we're talking about the death of a child or the severe injury of a child, we go down that road and the data isn't always there to support it. You know, you have some complaints, but it's a real challenge for us, as I've wanted us to do even more reporting than we've done, and it can be overwhelming at times to try to get to the bottom of some of these disputes.
Yeah, you get reporter PTSD too, just like social workers do, I would think, you know, from.
Yeah, maybe a little. Nobody needs to cry for me, but it's inevitable that these stories really do affect you. And sometimes it's long after the story is aired. I had to catch myself a couple times today because I've had the luxury of not living this for the last couple of weeks, which I had been for the last year. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, other questions about how things work behind the scenes in the media world, or about these particular stories? Okay.
Rich, if I could make one last pitch.
Please do, yeah.
I'm going to share my screen one more time because I'm shameless, and would just ask, let's see here if I can get it to work. I can't. Bear with me here one moment. Well, it's not working, so I'll just say it. Would anybody listening, I know we have a relatively small group here, but if there's ever anything on your radar that you think deserves attention, we will always listen. I never promise coverage, but I always want to hear it, and that includes feedback, good and bad. So if you just go to KSTP.com and look for the news team, you could track me down, but it's Rasmussen at KSTP.com. I also could not do my job without talking to people off camera, off the record, or on background, meaning that sometimes when people need to call me with something, I have to honor that promise to keep them out of it, which of course we do, and we couldn't do our job if we didn't do that. So I just want to thank everybody for listening, and hopefully we can do more of this work.
Yeah, and just let me piggyback on that. We have, a couple of people who are retired child protection supervisors, and some other folks as well, former family court judges, et cetera, who are willing to talk to Eric off camera. And that's, if you are such a person who has inside knowledge of how things are working, Eric is very reliable in terms of he's not going to, put you out there or quote you or anything like that. But what that, and you referred to it earlier, Eric, does is just gives you you call it a backstop. It's just, am I on the right track, or is this how things actually work? Am I going to say something and people say, well, no, you don't know anything, because that's not actually how it happens. And so it gives the confidence that what you're putting out there is accurate. So if you are or have contacts who could provide that kind of context to Eric, you won't get burned.
That's right. Thank you, Rich. I appreciate that endorsement.
Yeah. Okay. So last chance. Any questions, comments? Great to have you all, and hopefully see you in 2 weeks to find out what's going on with guardians ad litem in this state. It's not all pretty, but there's maybe some hope. And thanks for showing up. Thank you, Eric, so much. That was really.
Thank you, Rich. Thanks everybody for having me.
All
Really
right.
appreciate it.
Okay, thanks.
Take care.
Okay, bye.